The PlayStation 4 emulation scene continues to improve pretty much every single month. I did a video covering the PS4 about 6 months ago now, and I talked about the advancements in the emulation with the FP PS4 emulator, which was slowly starting to get more compatibility, and it was over about 100 titles that were now considered playable and going into game. But there has been a lot of activity in the scene with a new emulator known as Shed PS4. Now, I will say that Shed PS4, even though is a newer emulator than FP PS4, has been in development for quite some time as well. But the interesting thing about Shed PS4 is how quickly things are progressing along. A lot more than I think most people expected, myself included. Now, one of the things about Shed PS4 that I wanted to cover on today's episode is that the emulator is slowly starting to get in-game. And what I mean in-game, I'm talking about it's actually starting to render 3D environments. And there are some examples of this that I want to talk to you guys about in today's episode. But there's also a lot of things I want to talk about when it comes to PlayStation 4 emulation, because this is a very exciting time. I don't want to get ahead of myself and say that the floodgates have opened up and we're going to start to see a lot of games slowly starting to become playable. But this is a pretty major breakthrough. And it's one of the things that I've always said when it comes to emulation. And that is when there is, more than one emulator that's being developed and there is some momentum when it comes to these emulators, it really kind of drives the other teams to push forward and progress what they're doing as well. So Shed PS4 for me right now is the premier emulator that you can get for the PlayStation 4. But I do want to let you guys know that even though it is being something that's being talked about a lot, you've probably read about Shed PS4 in many kind of, Twitter posts and forum posts and news outlets talking about Bloodborne and things like that. We are still a very long way to go, but the big thing that I do want to cover, as mentioned today, is that these games are slowly starting to get in-game, and this is very exciting. So let's talk about that in some more detail. Now, the first game that is getting in-game is Red Dead Redemption. Now, of course, this is the Red Dead Redemption Remaster that was released, I think it was last year, and it came out for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4. So this, for all intents and purposes, is just a remaster of the original game that doesn't really have anything kind of specific going on. It doesn't have really anything, any extras associated to it. But one of the interesting things about this is that it's booting into game. And as you can see here, there are a lot of graphical issues that are going on. But as you can also see, the game is slowly starting to become playable. Now, one of the things that I do want to mention to you guys is the performance here, as you can see, is not the best. We're probably running at about 25 frames per second. And I might add, I'm running on a Core i9 processor with an NVIDIA RTX 4080. Now, this is obviously a pretty beefy PC to run an emulator on, but I also, just want to mention to you guys that the quality or the performance that you're seeing right now is not indicative of what the final, expectations that you should look for. Right now, the developers aren't really focused on the performance, on the speed side of things. They're still working on the accuracy. Now, the accuracy portion of this work is something that has to take precedence over everything else at this point, because the whole goal is to get more games booting, more games in-game, and more games rendering 3D environments. So getting the accuracy up is always going to be the first thing that you do when you build out a new emulator. And once the accuracy is at a place where it's really starting to be, very high in the compatibility list, something along the lines of, say, RPCS3 with a, high 60 or low 70% compatibility, that's when the developers will start to focus on the performance side. So I think that PlayStation 4 emulation is going to be pretty good, across the board. I think, if you do have a mid-spec PC or a high-end PC, I wouldn't be concerned that, PlayStation 4 emulation is just too demanding. It's something that's going to improve over time. But this Red Dead Redemption, going into game, it's running the original or the initial cutscene of the game, And even though there is a lot of flickering going on, there's obviously a lot of texture issues, there's a lot of geometry issues, and there is a lot of just erroneous data that's being displayed on the screen. This is very, very impressive stuff. Now, another game that I tested that's going into game is the Tomb Raider I-III Remastered collection. And this is also another game that gets into game, but I will say that you may have seen some videos going around of Tomb Raider running on Shed PS4. I believe that the people that have made those videos have sped up the footage significantly, because this is actually how fast it actually runs on my machine to date. But the good news is, once again, we are getting into game, and geometry is rendering correctly, and things are looking quite good here. So this is a very, very positive thing. Another game that does get into game that I haven't actually tested myself, but this was done by Georgios Margolis, which is one of the developers of Shed PS4. He was able to get the Shenmue 2 game running in Shed PS4, and this is very, very impressive, because this gets in game, and just by the looks of things, just by eyeballing things, it looks like it's rendering extremely well. There may be some lighting issues, of course, but overall, this is very, very good. So the fact that we are getting PlayStation 4 emulation finally getting in-game is a really big milestone, and it's something that really shouldn't be just kind of downplayed. Now, of course, Bloodborne is kind of what you've probably been hearing about, on media outlets and other YouTubers talking about. Bloodborne is finally booting up and getting as far as the character creation screen. And this is something that I tested personally myself, and I can confirm that Bloodborne 100% is slowly starting to become a game that may, I'm not saying, it will, but it may end up being playable here before too long. And this is something that I don't think any of us really expected to see for quite some time. I did indicate that I felt like Bloodborne is probably at least 2 years away from, being playable. And look, that still may be the case with what we're seeing, but the fact that Shed PS4 just kind of came out of nowhere, in many people's eyes at least, and is booting into Bloodborne, we get to the title screen, we can, we have control of the inputs, we can get to the character creation before it crashes, is, again, just a huge milestone. Another game that is getting into the character creation is Dark Souls Remastered, and this is as far as I get. But one of the interesting things that you may have seen this is that the Shed PS4 team tweeted an image of Dark Souls Remastered getting in game, and this is very, very exciting. So we are getting to that point now where the emulation is slowly starting to mature and improve over time. I've also tested some other games that also get in-game as well, and these are some of the kind of smaller 2D games that were playable on PS4, but I just kind of wanted to show you guys that compatibility of Shed PS4, even though technically doesn't support as many games as PS4, the type of game that it's emulating is actually quite impressive. Now, the other emulator that obviously a lot of people know about is PS4, and we've covered PS4 on the channel before, and it supports over 100 titles, albeit smaller games, the 2D style games that were developed in like Game Maker and things like that. There are some kind of signs that the emulator does get in-game with, full 3D in some scenarios, but it's very, very limited. But I want to mention to you guys that PS4 isn't something that you should just kind of discount and say, this emulator's dead, it's all about Shed PS4 now. PS4, if you do follow along with the development of that particular emulator, is undergoing a significant rewrite, I'll call it, where the developer is working on an entirely new branch. And this particular code base has been in the works for about 6 months now, maybe even longer than that. And I think once he's ready to kind of merge that code into the main, into the main trunk and start releasing builds again, I would expect to see compatibility of PS4 increase as well. So look, things are very, very exciting when it comes to all things PlayStation 4 emulation. There is some awesome things going on right now. And look, when it comes to emulation, it doesn't really matter what system it is. The PlayStation 4 obviously is something that you can still buy games for and you can still use to this day. And look, I feel like that even though the PlayStation 4 is a system that a lot of people are still playing in their living rooms right now, getting the emulation to a point where when the PlayStation 4 finally kind of is in the rear view mirror and we are no longer actually making games for it anymore, and look, that could still be a couple of years away from the making of this episode. It could be 2026 by the time the last ever PlayStation 4 game ever gets kind of, released, maybe even longer than that. It could be the entire generation. But the point here is that when it comes to PS4, we are really in a good position right now, guys, where I feel like when the PlayStation 4 is finally sunset and Sony has moved on from it, we're going to have an emulator that I feel like is going to be very, very strong. And this is a very exciting thing because when the PlayStation 4 finally dies, we will have an emulator that will live on. There's some exciting stuff going on, and I feel like, there's going to be some more and more advancements. I think by the time this video, comes out, and look, 4 weeks after this video comes out, I feel like this video is going to be obsolete because we're going to start to see a lot more things become playable and getting into game. And look, I'm very excited. So I just wanted to make this episode at this point and just kind of put a pin or just draw a line in the sand and say, this is the start of something very, very exciting. PlayStation 4 emulation has been around for a while. We know that games like Sonic Mania have been playable for pretty much 3 or 4 years now, but being able to get these games, with 3D rendering is very, very exciting. But we're going to leave it here for today's episode, guys. I hope you liked it. This was just a quick one just to let you guys know what's going on with Shad PS4 and PlayStation 4 emulation, because it is very exciting, and I'll definitely keep up to date as things continue to come out. I will cover it on here on this channel. So once again, if you like this episode, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.